computer. Okay, welcome back, folks, to Political Economics, University of Pretoria 2021. Today we are going to see, let me share my screen. Today we are going to see the subject of democracy and social media. Let's start with okay, let's start with democracy. That's the one which comes first there. Okay, let's take a look at this paper, folks, by Robin Burgess, Remy Jedwab, Eduardo Miguel, Amit Murjaria, and Gerardo Padro e Miquel. You can see also, folks, that these major papers which we've been covering here, they are usually written by a bunch of people, right? Nowadays, to do political economics or development economics, at the highest level, it's not really a one-person job. Okay, it's because most of the time, I think one of the things that I have always said, most of the time, the innovation is not necessarily the research question. The research question sometimes is simple. The research question sometimes has been around for quite some time in this in academic and also policymaking circles. The method, you have also seen, folks, that the method is usually, there is no abuse of notation in the methodology, right? It's very simple stuff, proper, but very simple. Sometimes we are talking about OLS, we are talking about panel data, fixed effects, right? People do not use random effects. Economists do not like random effects, and you should know why, okay? But usually, most of the time, I don't recall covering any paper with you which abuses notation in terms of methodology. But usually, folks, the innovation is the data set that these people are using. There is a fair amount of work being put together by these people when actually putting their data sets together. And that's why you're going to see, folks, that there is always there are, first of all, it's names always in alphabetical order, right? No matter what some people tell you, it's alphabetical. It has always been in alphabetical order. And second, you can see that there are always senior people, right? In this case here, Robin and Eduardo Miguel, they are the senior people in the paper, and there is someone in the middle, Remy, and then there are some PhD students. Okay, and it still is in alphabetical order, folks. Okay, but the point here really is what is the innovation? And the innovation, the hard work is in putting together the data set. Okay, it wasn't this guy here who put the data set together. It wasn't this guy here who put the data set together. Okay, it was the other ones. Okay, let's see what this paper is about. As I said, this paper came out in American Economic Review 2015. You can just press on the DOI and go straight to the paper's website, and where you can also, it came out in AR, so you can also find the files, the do file and the data, right, for that make this paper. So all those things are available for transparency purposes, right, from the paper's website. What is this paper about? The value of democracy, evidence from road building in Kenya. So it says a lot. It's about democracy. And let me just put this down here. It's about democracy, or the role of democracy. It uses data from Kenya, and from Kenya it uses data on road building. Let's see what we can get from the abstract. This paper provides credible quantification of the extent of ethnic favoritism. Ethnic favoritism is, as I said, we have already discussed this, right? Ethnicity is still very salient in Africa. So they are trying to see if presidents, Kenya is a republic, if presidents from different ethnicities favor their co-ethnics or not when allocating, in this case, roads. Okay, provides credible quantification of the extent of ethnic favoritism using data on road building. Roads is something important, right, folks? Because roads, even if people don't use roads, people see roads. Okay, when a road is being built, even if they don't see, even if they don't move, even if they stay in the same place for their whole lives, but people can actually see the road being built, and people after that, people can see the road there. Okay. In Kenyan districts, so it uses panel data, Kenyan panel data across the 1963-2011 period. So it's a panel data, right? Because it's across districts and over time. So it's a panel data. Okay. And 1963 is probably independence. Let me see, there is something on the chat here. Okay, thank you. So they use 1963 is probably right after the independence, and Kenya was a British, if I'm not mistaken, a UK colony. What else we can get from the, so that was the research question, right, folks? That was the research question. Very second sentence of the paper, they give us the research question. So what else we can get? Results across the post-independence period. So yeah, it's 1963 is post-independence period. They find strong evidence of ethnic favoritism. Let me see, there is something up there. Yes, that is the paper that I gave to her when I was still at the University of Pretoria, before I moved to WITS, when she was my PhD student. That was the paper this paper I gave to her to use as a sort of base, right, for her first PhD paper, right, which has been around for some time. Okay, yes, so that is the paper. If you are an economist, there are other papers dealing with the same subject in political science, right? In fact, there are more papers about this in political science than in economics. But if you are an economist, this is the paper that you have to, this is the first paper. If you are interested in this subject, Ana Maria, this is the paper that you have to use, right, as the main source. Yeah. So okay. So what is that they find? They find the districts that share the ethnicity of the president, right? And Kenya has essentially two different ethnicities relaying in power, right? The Khoi and no, the Khoi. I'll get there. This is not 10 o'clock yet. The Moi, not the Khoi. No, it's not 10 o'clock yet. Districts that share the ethnicity of the president receive twice as much expenditure on roads and have 5 times the length of paved roads built. Okay, so they do find evidence for ethnic favoritism. And I didn't highlight, but they also find, folks, right, that Kenya has transitioned from democracy to more democracy, less democracy, more democracy, less democracy since 1963. And they also find that we are going to see later on that periods of democracy help to attenuate this sort of bias. Okay. So let's go to the introduction of the paper. Some context. First paragraph, usually you give a little bit of context. Ethnic favoritism refers to a situation. So they explain ethnic favoritism where co-ethnics benefit from patronage and public policy decisions, and therefore receive a disproportionate share. It doesn't mean that the other groups are not receiving anything, but if you are a co-ethnic, if there is ethnic favoritism, if you are a co-ethnic of the president, or if you are co-ethnic with people in the cabinet, right? you end up getting disproportionate resources in your area. Receive a disproportionate share of public resources when members of their ethnic group control the government. Okay. So it's not necessarily in this case it's about the ethnicity of the president, but it can also be the ethnicity of the cabinet, right? And yes, folks, South Africa can also be an interesting example because up to Cyril, since 1994, there were two ethnicities in power, either Xhosa or Zulu, right? So South Africa also is an interesting example, but South Africa doesn't have that less democracy or more democracy. So South Africa since 1994 has been a stable democracy. Okay, so yes, there are research questions available there. What else I found interesting? A little bit of motivation, therefore, to understand the recent political and economic performance of many African countries. So it's an interesting question, right? It is crucially important. Crucially is a strong word to determine to what extent ethnic favoritism is prevalent and whether the emergence, or in many cases, re-emergence of democracy, and re-emergence that is important for the Kenyan context, right? Because Kenya has transitioned to democracy a number of times since independence of democracy has helped mitigate it, right? In the paper, they make two contributions. So contributions, always interesting, right? First, they quantify the extent of ethnic favoritism in public resource allocation in an important African country, right? Kenya is an important African country. All countries are important, right? But Kenya is always on the news for the post-independence period. Second, they examine whether the transition into and out of democracy affects the extent of ethnic favoritism, right? And we kind of already know that democracy helps to attenuate the effect of ethnic favoritism. The research design that is dramatic. Dramatic is a very strong word. Ethnic segregation across districts in Kenya. So a little bit of context, right? Which is the result of the design of colonial era borders in the period before Kenya's independence, 1963. So the districts have been designed in such a way that would put a particular ethnicity within that district. Each post-independence district was dominated by a single ethnic group. So I'm just repeating myself, and this pattern remains stable over time. So there is not being too much change in that sort of pattern, right? Therefore, they can directly assess using road spending and construction by district. So that's the sort of data they get, whether or not ethnic groups that share the ethnicity of the president disproportionately benefited from roads. Why roads? Well, first of all, because roads is very salient. You can see roads being built. You can see roads there after they were built. You can also see roads being deteriorated, right? And also because they got the data quite not easily, but that's what they wanted to do, right? Second, road expenditure, and that's also important, can be directly measured. They have carried out extensive historical archival work to recover road expenditure data. So they got the road expenditure data. And Kenya was a British colony, so sometimes the data collection organizations are there. Road expenditure data at the project level. This has enabled them to construct district level panel data. As I said, it's a panel data because they have data over time and across districts, right? For all 41 Kenyan districts across the entire post-independence period. So it's essentially 1963, 2011, and then 41. The cross section is the N is equal to 41. In addition, they have constructed a panel of road presence in each of the 41 Kenyan districts using historical maps. I don't know if you ever have seen, I remember when I was a kid seeing those Michelin maps, right? with all the roads from all countries of the world, right? So they can therefore cross-check. So they use a sort of second data set on roads to cross-check the district road expenditure data from the road projects with the district road construction data from the maps. So they cross-check, right, to see if the results are robust. Little bit of information there, folks. As I said, moi, not koi. Sorry about that. So they just give a sort of timeline with the Kikuyu, with the Kenyatas, and with the Mois, right? And when there was democracy, and when there was less democracy, more democracy there, right? Just to give a sort of, just to motivate, right? Of essentially, it's the two different, oops, that's not work. It's the Kikuyu and the Kalinejin, right? What else more about the design? Roads are the largest, and that's also important for the motivation, right? Roads are the largest single element of public expenditure in Kenya. It's not education, it's not health, it's roads, right? Constituting about 15% of total development expenditure over the sample period. So they are again motivating. Why roads? Why not hospitals? Or why not schools? Or why not electricity or water? Right? It's because roads is the most important, is the largest element of public expenditure. This is 3 times what the Kenyan central government spends on health, education, or water. So they are motivating, although perhaps there are more pressing things in Kenya, but they spend more on roads. Roads expenditure is centrally allocated and a highly visible form of public investment, and therefore a prime area for political patronage. Road building, therefore, represents an attractive setting in which to analyze the extent of ethnic favoritism. Okay. Moreover, why is this paper important? What makes Kenya an interesting case to study? The post-independence history of Kenya provides them both with switches in the ethnicity of the president and switches into and out of democracy under the same president. See figure 1 that we have just seen. Transitions to and from democracy. During the study period, they observe a transition in autocracy from democracy under the first president of Kenya, a Kenyatta, or a Kikuyu, transition from a Kikuyu president to a Kalinenjin president, Moi, under an autocratic regime, a transition out of autocracy into democracy under Moi, a democratic succession of a Kalinenjin president to a Kikuyu president. This shift allows them to identify the effect of political transitions on ethnic favoritism, holding the identity of the leader constant. So it's an attractive setting, right? It's obviously that in practical terms, it's not an attractive setting, but for a research paper, it makes an attractive setting because essentially there are 2 ethnicities which control the politics of Kenya. And, and also there were transitions to and from democracy over this post-independence period. I didn't find this interesting. What do they find? The results, we are still on the introduction. They find striking patterns. Striking is a very striking word, right? So it's a very dramatic word. So avoid dramatic words when you write a research paper. Across the 1963-2011 period, Kenyan districts that share the ethnicity of the president received twice as much expenditure on roads and almost 5 times the length of paved roads built relative to what would be predicted by their population share. There's evidence of an extreme degree, extreme is an extreme word, of ethnic favoritism. However, these biases are not constant, and that's the role of democracy. While in periods of autocracy, co-ethnic districts receive 3 times the average expenditure in roads and over 5 times the length of paved roads. Both these biases disappear during periods of democracy. So democracy helps to attenuate the ethnic favoritism in Kenya. Therefore, the political regime is an important determinant of ethnic favoritism, they claim. The fact that they find similar results using two independent road data sets, so they, as I said, they have two data sets for robustness, one based on expenditure and the other on road maps, is reassuring. So those are the results. Theoretical framework, folks, they have a bit of a theory there. I'm not going to cover the theory part of the paper because I really want to concentrate on the empirics. Background and data, but let me stop sharing here a little bit to see if there are questions, comments. No? All clear? Okay. Let me share my screen again. Okay, in terms of background and data, Kenya's population comprises a mix of more than 40, a little bit of context, right? Ethnic groups, according to the population census conducted immediately prior to independence in 1962, Kenya's main ethnic groups were the Kikuyu, the Luo, the Luhia, Kalenjin, and Kamba. The shares of these main ethnic groups have remained stable. The same in South Africa, by the way. The share of these main ethnic groups has remained stable since then, despite the fact that the national population has increased nearly fivefold. So that means what they are saying here is that the fertility rates of these ethnic groups are pretty similar, right? What else? The alignment, data, the alignment of interest between the British and the local chiefs, and we saw the role of the chiefs last week. Both of whom preferred greater district ethnic homogeneity for obvious reasons, right? The chiefs it would be easier for the chiefs to control their own population. As a means of facilitating governance, that's a nice way, right? Facilitating governance. However, meant that by 1933, district borders were drawn in a way so that each district typically contained a dominant ethnicity, right? Think in terms of South Africa. KwaZulu-Natal is mostly Zulu, and the Eastern Cape is mostly Xhosa. Okay. By independence in 1963, district and ethnic boundaries tightly coincide. 38 out of 41 districts in Kenya had a single ethnic group constituting more than 50% of the population. And this remains the case up until the present. Okay. Again, think in terms of South Africa or any other African country which you can think would have data. I'm not going to do that because you don't need me to tell your history, right? Ethnic politics in Kenya. Data, roads. Main measure of road investment is expenditures on new roads annually by district. So it's a final data during 1963-2011 period obtained from the development estimates of Kenya. Convenient, more on data, convenient feature of roads is that they are easy to observe on the ground. So we have already said that. The second measure of road investment comes from Michelin maps, right, which capture the actual physical extent of paved roads. Probably if you talk to your grandparents, they are going to have those Michelin maps somewhere in their garage. Paved roads account for the majority of road expenditures. They are just repeating themselves to make sure that the referee or the reviewer doesn't come up and say, well, but why you guys are using road data? Why not health? So they keep motivating. They keep motivating their use of roads. Paved roads account for the majority of road expenditures, and their spread can be reliably tracked across the period. A little bit on the they're just showing there the districts, right? For instance, the Kikuyu and the Kalenjin districts there, and over time, just to show that first of all, it hasn't changed much, the composition, and also where the roads, new roads were built. And okay. Methods and results. They seek to estimate the relation, so that we already know, right? It's panel data, so they're going to use panel data methods. They are going to use fixed effects, right? Not random effects. Do not use random effects. Because, why not? Because economists don't like random effects. Why not? Because, well, then you have to read your lecture notes. Because random effects assumes that everything is pretty much well behaved, right, folks? Random effects is something that other social scientists use. They seek to estimate the relationship between the ethnicity of the president and public expenditures in districts demographically dominated by his or her, but in this case, his co-ethnics. Right? In the period under examination, they have Kikuyu presidents and Kalenjin presidents. There are 7 districts dominated by Kikuyus and 6 dominated by Kalenjins, and out of 41. They present the results using 2 approaches, a graphical approach, so they're going to show the data, essentially they're going to show us the data, right? And then they're going to show us some regressions. Regression main estimating equation takes the following form: road against I think that's what really matters, right? The road expenditure against co-ethnic district, plus co-ethnic interacted with democracy to see if democratic periods help to mitigate the ethnic favoritism. Let's see where they always explain what is the above. The dependent variable is the road spending or road construction measure for year T and district D, so IT as described above. To capture co-ethnicity with the president, they use an indicator variable, co-ethnic district. So we know, folks, for instance, how do they get this? We know, right, that KwaZulu-Natal was co-ethnic with Jacob Zuma. We know that the Eastern Cape was co-ethnic with Mbeki and Mandela. Okay, so that takes a value of 1 for districts where at least 50%, 50 plus 1 of the population has the same ethnic affiliation as the serving president. How do you get this information? It's not just it's not good just okay, Manuel said so. No, you check the census, right? The population, the census usually in Africa has information on ethnicity. As far as I know, there is no information about my ethnicity on a Brazilian census, right? But in Africa, this is very salient. The democracy T term is an indicator variable which takes the value of 1, right? It's a dummy value of 1 during periods of multi-party democracy. How do you get to know that? Well, we just check the Polity4 data set. Okay. Easy, easy, easy. Graphical results, folks. Figure 4, road expenditure in presidential co-ethnic and no co-ethnic districts, 1963, 2011. Okay, so the blues that essentially is, well, it's a very simple time series, this one. Shared of road expenditure, blues, you can see that the blues are co-ethnic districts, they get more. Okay, they get more. Let's go to the regressions. Let's get some excitement in life. Results, table 1. Usually table 1 is the most important table of results because it's the other tables, they are essentially robustness tests, and their robustness shouldn't change too much. So road expenditure, ethnicity and demographic changes, 1963, 2011. Notes ordinary OLS regressions on annual district year expenditure panel data set of 41 districts. So 1963, 2011, 41 districts. It's a nice panel. It's not a large panel. It's not a very extensive panel. It's not a panel of 40,000 individuals or anything, but it's workable. They get their paper. They got into the American Economic Review, right? If you do it well, if you motivate it well, if you have the right names on the front page, it might well happen. Co-ethnic district. This is the first variable that is co-ethnic district. It's always positive and significant, right? In terms of share of road development expenditure, always positive and significant. The second variable that is important for us here, folks, is co-ethnic district interacted with democracy, and you can see that then the estimates are negative, and actually they help to mitigate the effect. They help to mitigate the effect. The size of the effect is a little bit smaller, but they help to mitigate the effect, all right? Because you see, panel A is just a regression with co-ethnic district, and then panel B is a regression with co-ethnic district plus the interaction term. Okay, and you can see that the size of the effect of democracy is a little bit smaller than co-ethnic district. So it doesn't do the job of completely canceling ethnic favoritism, but it mitigates. Okay, that's why they use the word mitigation. What else I found interesting? Road building ethnicity and democratic changes 64 2002. What is the difference? Okay, let's first go to nodes. So less regressions on a district year map. Okay, though that's the second data set and the Michelin maps. Panel data set of 41 districts for the period of 64 and 2002. So they have a little bit less data. And then they give information of when the maps were published, right? 64, 67. So they have a little bit of less data. But the results stand, and that's what they want to show, that the results of table 1 are robust. Co-ethnic district is always positive and statistically significant. Panel B, they have co-ethnic district plus co-ethnic district interacted with democracy. And we can see that actually now the effects of democracy, and not always, but again, it's negative, right? When interacted with democracy, and then it's a question, right, that you can ask, but what is the role of democracy there? Well, democracy is supposed to be a more competitive period in political history, in political life of a particular society, and therefore, the whole point of democracy is to make sure that the politician in power behaves better. The democracy is an incentive mechanism, right? In order to make sure that the politician in power behaves better. Okay, because if the politician in power doesn't behave well, he, she, them will be substituted by someone from the opposition. Okay. What else? You can see, those of you who are familiar with Leone's paper, you are going to see that this is, I didn't highlight this, but there is a counterfactual there. The paper, her paper follows this paper very closely. It's an interesting paper too, but it hasn't been published yet. More results, road expenditure, again, coming back to road expenditure, not the Michelin maps. Ethnicity and democratic changes, political and leadership transitions, again, OLS regressions on annual district year expenditure panel data set of 41 districts, 1963, 2011, 41 districts. Okay, I think I know this table is. So here they put different different people in power. So you can see here, folks, let's try to do this together. When Kenyatta is in power, a Kikuyu district during autocracy gets positive, right? That's the number you are after. Okay. Kenyatta, Kikuyu district, they overlap, right? Therefore, during an autocracy, let me see what's in the chat. I couldn't find what the ethnicity of the Rwandan cabinet members are, but the cabinet has a 50-50 gender ratio, and the average age of minister for they attribute to the one laptop. The one laptop. Okay, can I talk about this in a few moments? I got lost. Right, I'll come back to that. I'll come back to the question. Okay. Let me just finish this paper and then I go back there. Okay. It is just 10 o'clock, so things will get better now. So that is the number. That's the number that you have to see, right, folks? They are still trying to make the case for their results. Okay. And the same here, huh? This Kalenjin and Moi autocracy, it's a positive number, okay? Yeah, one thing about Rwanda is that at Rwanda we have to see. Okay, let me go back. Let me finish this. I think we are actually coming to the end of this paper, because now they discuss a lot. There is, and you can see, folks, that there aren't lots of tables also, right? Sometimes I see master's dissertations or honors papers with lots of tables and tables and tables. So you can see also that these papers, they don't have massive numbers of tables and graphs, but they do it well, okay? Equality is more important, perhaps, that's my hunch, than quantity, right? I think. You see, there are lots of words in there instead of abuse of notation in terms of methodology. Okay, conclusion. For ethnic favoritism to be a viable political strategy, the president must be able to manipulate the allocation of public expenditure with few constraints. And one interesting thing also, folks, is that if which makes us think, right, about about democratic maturity or democratic capital in African societies, right? If there is too much ethnic favoritism, if the president in power comes from an ethnicity which is dominant in a particular country, that particular ethnicity being who is benefiting from this extra public investment will not necessarily vote for democracy, literally, right? People don't necessarily have to go for democracy. Democratic capital is something that takes a long time to be built. So that's another idea that comes from this paper, right? Democracy helps to mitigate the effect of ethnic favoritism. But again, it's about numbers. It's about economics is very much about numbers, right? It's very much about supply and demand. Okay, so again, if you have a society with a dominant ethnic group, and if this dominant ethnic group has also a president in power, and this president is making sure that their co-ethnics are doing well, the majority of this country will not necessarily, during autocratic periods, the majority of this country do. There is nothing that says that people like democracy, right? I do, but that's my personal view, right? What I'm trying to say here is that there are research questions coming from the results. Okay. The president must be able to manipulate the allocation of public expenditure with few constraints, right, and little political cost. Again, it's about numbers. Ethnic favoritism and weak controls of the chief executive therefore go hand in hand. Democracy becomes consolidated in many low-income countries, but again, it's a struggle for democracy to become consolidated, right? Including many in sub-Saharan Africa. Not only does political competition become better regulated, but the constraints on the executive action are also strengthened due to the scrutiny that parliament, mass media, and civil society are able to exercise. Again, democracy is essentially an incentive mechanism, okay? It works as an incentive mechanism. If someone wants to remain in power for 2 terms, for instance, or someone wants her party to remain in power for a long time, democracy acts as an incentive mechanism. First, can they detect quantitative evidence of ethnic favoritism in public resource allocation in an African country? Those are the research questions that they are repeating. Second, does a transition into and out of democracy under the same leader exacerbate or constrain this ethnic favoritism? So we saw in the paper, right, that during autocratic periods, ethnic favoritism is more prevalent. And that democracy, we also saw that democracy helps to mitigate the effect, the pervasive effect of ethnic favoritism. A little bit of information about data. Remember, the conclusion is usually a rehash of the conclusion, usually shorter. Therefore, to address these questions, they construct two new data series that directly capture public allocation decisions by the central government, one based on the geographic coding of road project data, and the other on the innovative use of historical maps, the Michelin maps. Why do they use two data sets? Well, probably, folks, because when they submitted this paper to American Economic Review, the reviewer said that they needed some robustness, okay, to make sure that the results were stable. There are two main empirical results. Central government investments in roads have been subject to a high degree of ethnic favoritism, in particular during periods of autocracy, with districts co-ethnic to the present receiving 3 times the average expenditure in roads and 5 times the length of paved roads during periods of autocracy. On the contrary, ethnic groups not linked to the president, which constitute the bulk of the population, in this case, they constitute the bulk of the population, receive far fewer roads across the 23-year autocratic period, right? Second, these biases disappear entirely, and not entirely, we saw the results, but they help to mitigate during periods of democracy. Again, because democracy is an incentive mechanism which makes politicians more responsive to what the people want. What else I found interesting? I think we are already on the references, folks. Usual names are there: Acemoglu, Alesina, Barrow, Robert Bates, Besley, Burgess, Francesco Caselli. The usual Timothy Conley for metrics, Easterly. I don't know all these people, but I know some. I saw Michalopoulos and Papaiwano, Edward Miguel, Padron, Posner. There we go. Okay, let me stop sharing to see if there are questions. Let me go up. Okay, there we are. Let me stop sharing. Let me check. So there was a question. There was something on the chat. I couldn't find what the ethnicities of the Rwandan cabinet members are, but I think, folks, let's do. I think for that you need someone who can actually know a person from Rwanda, okay, who can actually distinguish surnames or even first names. Okay, but also bear in mind that the idea of having surnames is very new. Okay, even in Europe, right? Europeans didn't have surnames until, in historical terms, recently. Okay. So for that, I think an idea would be to get in touch with someone from Rwanda or even Burundi or the DRC and see if you can actually get by interpreting the surnames what their ethnicity is. But the cabinet has a 50-50 gender ratio and the average age of ministers is 47. Yeah. They attribute success in the one per child policy in schools and making use of drone technology in healthcare of these ratios. Well, I don't know. One thing that about Rwanda, one thing here is Rwanda had a genocide in 1994, and there is a lot of economic growth happening in Rwanda. And some people, growth economists would say that there is a lot of convergence growth happening in Rwanda. Okay, but again, if you are a Solovian growth economist, if you do Romer, you would say that a lot of human capital was lost in 1984. So Rwanda is, because of its recent history, you have to interpret it nicely, right? And responsibly. That's what I'm saying. A study by blah, blah, blah found that female citizens identified more with their government ethnicities than their gender. The same holds for men, given that ethnicity plays a large role. Declared ethnicity played. Yes, but you see, again, despite the fact that government has declared that ethnicity plays no role in the politics of the country. But that is the same in South Africa, right? The ANC is quite clear in saying that it's not a tribal political party. But when you look at the actual data, and then you can see the paper by Leonel Walters, you see that it's quite the opposite. And that's what makes actually these papers interesting. I don't think Leonel exploits this nicely. Is what, for instance, in the South African context, what the ANC claims and what they actually do, right? Or what that government there claims. If there was a genocide barely less than a generation ago, if there was a genocide in Rwanda, obviously that they are going to write that. But if there was an actual genocide, almost 1 million people simply disappeared quite quickly, right? They were faster than the Germans. And the Germans had essentially factories to get rid of people. So they were quite quick in getting rid of people. So if there was a genocide, it's because there is a lot of ethnic differences there, right? So it's, and again, that's what makes a paper about Rwanda interesting. I think I saw a paper about Rwanda being presented in a conference once. But again, papers about Rwanda, they have to be very responsibly written, right? Take into account the country's history. It would be very interesting to see if there is any evidence for, absolutely. I think the setting is perfect, right? But again, it's a very small country. I think it was a Belgian colony. The Belgians were not really well. It was a Belgian colony, just like the DRC, and it's about numbers. After the genocide, right? After you have to look at the numbers of those ethnicities before and after 1984, for instance, how the balance has shifted or not. But absolutely, I think it would make a great paper. Okay, more questions about this paper, folks, that we have just seen? All clear? All reasonably clear? Yes or no? Okay, if everything is reasonably clear, let me pause recording. Okay, folks, welcome back to Political Economics. Let's go straight to the second paper. Oops, but I haven't done. I haven't started. Okay. Oops, I think I have the wrong stuff here. Let me stop sharing. Let me share again. Here it is. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, folks, now we are going to see the paper by Eliana La Ferrara, Mass Media and Social Change. Can we use television to fight poverty? Well, there it is, the research question, right? And it came out in the Journal of the European Economic Association. And you can download the paper from either from the journal or from Eliana's website. Here it is again. Eliana is at Bocconi. Okay, let's see what we can get from about this paper just by reading the abstract. The research question, very first sentence. Paper explores the potential use of entertainment media programs, or edutainment, as she will call that stuff later on, for achieving development goals, right? And she will essentially, folks, this paper is very much about TVs, the role of TVs in changing behavior and social norms. So let's see, what are the channels? How can TVs or TV programs change social norms? Well, so you have to explain, right, the channels. And there are, first of all, information provision. TVs can spread information, even if the person watching the TV is not really aware that TV is providing information. TV programs can provide information in a very easy way. Role modeling and preference change, right? Role modeling and preference change. What is she talking about here? Well, essentially, if you are in an African country and you are watching TV, and there are things that people in Africa have access to, right? Coca-Cola, TVs, mobile phones are widely available. And if people in somewhere, I don't know, in each country, it doesn't matter, right? She's gonna use data from a bunch of African countries and then specifically from Nigeria. But if you are in the interior, in the countryside of Africa, in a remote area of an African country, and you are watching TV, and more importantly, what is that you are watching was made in the USA, for instance, right? Where families are smaller, where people don't have 9 kids anymore, but 2. That will probably can have an effect on how people behave. Okay, people will be watching. This is just an example. People will be watching programs where small families are prevalent, and that can probably change behavior. And time use. Time use is the usual stuff, right, folks? Is how you allocate your time, either in the front of TV or doing other things. That is time allocation. Okay. Channels and data. She reviews the existing evidence on how exposure to commercial television and radio affects outcomes such as fertility preferences, or how many kids people decide to have. Gender norms. Gender norms is essentially attitudes towards the wife or towards the husband. Education, migration, and social capital. And she complements these individual country studies with a cross-country evidence from Africa and with a more in-depth analysis for Nigeria using the DHS. Okay. Channels and data. Introduction. Context. Recent years have seen a massive penetration of mass media in the developing world, right? I think we are all aware of that. Even traditionally remote communities nowadays have access to radio, television, and occasionally, Anne-Marie, to the internet as well. Okay. And then she puts everything towards the end of the paper, all the figures and the tables. But the left panel of the figure shows the evolution during the 2 decades from 1990 to 2010 of the share of households owning a TV set in a number of sub-Saharan African countries, right? So while at the beginning of the period, this beginning of the period is essentially 1990, this share varies between 0 and 20%. By the end of the period, 2010, it ranges from 10 and 50%. So there is an increase in real terms, in terms of number of TV sets and number of people with a TV set, with several countries increasing their TV ownership rates by a factor of 4 or more. The right panel is towards the end of the figure, shows the evolution over the same period of the share of women with secondary education or higher as a proxy for human capital accumulation in those countries. So we are going to see the figures towards the end, but she shows us essentially the number of people with access to TV has been rising over time, and the number of women with secondary education has also been rising over time, over the same period. Research question, the question is rather whether she can exploit the rapid spread of TVs and other media, such as radio, to reach large populations at low cost, right? It really is at low cost, right? With messages that are complementary to education and other social policies. So for instance, again, if people are watching soap opera, where someone beats someone else all the time, that will probably have an effect, okay, on social norms and behavior. But if someone else, more people are actually watching soap opera where people do not beat each other anymore, people do respect each other, then maybe that will also have an effect on social norms and behaviors. In this paper, she suggests that the answer is yes, based on rigorous empirical evidence that is increasingly emerging from economics and other social sciences. Okay. Key channels of impact of TVs are information provision. And later on, she's going to give an example of, she's going to review a paper, in fact, which uses data from the South African soap opera called The Scandal. Okay, so there is a paper which uses data from Scandal. Where key channels of impact are information provision, role modeling, again, and preference change, and how people see, right? So for instance, I'm going to give you a very silly example, but all these silly examples can have an impact, can have an effect. People really, in South Africa, people really follow European and in particular English football, right? And those footballers, they have some role modeling, right? They have an effect, the way they behave have an effect on how people behave in other societies. And again, time use. Time use is essentially the old story that if people are watching TV, people are not doing something else, okay? And I have to say something else, folks, because African societies, you guys are extremely conservative, so I have to behave myself here. These outcomes include fertility preferences and gender norms. Outcomes include fertility preference or fertility rates or number of kids that people want to have. Gender norms, education, migration, social capital, right? Let's see what else I found interesting in the introduction. Motivation for this paper from a policy perspective. Yes, there is policy. There is a large debate of the effectiveness of foreign aid. That's a parallel literature that we are not talking about, right? Foreign aid and a corresponding quest for policy interventions that promise a vast outreach at low cost. Edutainment, that's the word. Edutainment is potentially one of these, given the minimal requirements it poses in terms of administrative capacity and supply infrastructure compared, for example, to social welfare programs. So there is something in the... This is interesting because this is how looting is spread across the country lately. There is a paper there. I think that's the use of that sort of social media data. If you're talking about social media, for instance, right? If you are telling us that you think that Twitter was used or Facebook, right? I'm not on social media, right? I don't have a Facebook page. I don't tweet, but because that data is available. You can actually get the data even from Google searches, okay, on what people search on Google. So that sort of data is available. So if you can get your hands, all of you, right, get your hands on that sort of social media data and the searches and the words that were tweeted during the looting, right? At that time, so then you can at least get a correlation of the importance of social media in actually spreading that sort of, in that case, bad message. Okay, I think there is a paper there. I actually, when I was at WITS, I had a student working on that, but then I had to jump. right? So second, the incremental contribution of media such as TV. Let me see, there's something else on chat there. Would citizens be more conservative? Being more conservative have an effect on growth? You need to apply to Twitter to do a large download. Otherwise, you can download 6,000 tweets per day. Let me think about that. Let me think. I will come back to that. Incremental contribution of media such as TV and radio is predicted to be highest in contexts where other sources of information, for instance, newspaper readership has been coming down, formal education, not always successful, as we know in South Africa, relatively less diffuse. Poor countries with low literacy rates clearly constitute an environment where the easily accessible language of television and radio gives them a comparative advantage over other means of communication. She is not saying that we have to substitute TVs. Instead of going to school, we should just stay watching TVs. She's not saying that, right? But she's saying that people watch TV. It's a fact. A lot people watch more and more TV. That's a fact too, right? There are more and more TVs around. That's another fact. She's saying what she's saying is that programs can have sometimes an implicit positive message about particular things, such as gender norms, right? Or such as smaller families or lower fertility rates. Okay, that's what she's saying. What is the framework of that? First channel. So there are 3 channels, right, of how TVs and radios can affect perceptions about particular things. First, can provide new information, therefore inducing people to update their beliefs. Actually, I have a working paper on that with Matt and Joseph as well. How particular social norms, good, let's say what we think is a good social norm, can be spread by TVs. Second channel through which media could change behaviors by changing individual preferences. As I said, people might well be watching American programs or UK programs or French programs, right? And I'm using US was not a colonial power, right? But UK and US is a commercial power. But the UK and France, they were colonial powers, and they still play, they still have influence on their former colonies. Okay, more than we think, economically and politically. But if people are watching programs put together in those more developed societies, where the usual example that she gives also below, where families are smaller, then that can perhaps implicitly even have an effect on fertility decisions down here, right? So for instance, I'm going to give you an example. Eliana LaFerrara, she did her PhD at Harvard with, I think with one of the greatest of them all, Alberto Alessina, who just passed away last year. And I think one of her first papers was essentially using Brazilian data. She's an Italian, but she used this Brazilian data from the 60s and 70s. That was when the Globo TV is a media network in Brazil. It's one of the largest in the world, right? And they export the famous Brazilian soap operas all over the place, right? So they produce the Brazilian soap operas essentially. And the sort of data that she got at the time was when Globo TV was actually expanding into very remote regions of Brazil, into what we call the rainforest. You call it the rainforest, right? I call it the Amazon. Okay, and that was the first moment that TVs reached those remote communities, and essentially the Brazilian soap operas, they would take place in urban Rio and São Paulo. Okay, and how those soap operas, those programs taking place in very developed urban areas, affected social norms in very remote areas of the country. It is like let's say the local example would be South African soap operas take place in Johannesburg, and how they affect behavior in Orania, for instance, right? They take place in urban Joburg, right, where social norms are already different than in the interior of the country, right? And how that can affect. And she got this interesting data because she could actually see that was the moment she got data, historical data of when signal, right, the global TV signal reached those areas. So she got the before and the after. That was very nice. Okay. Second channel, though, through which media could have changed behaviors by changing individual preference. The effect doesn't necessarily go through the provision of new information, but may directly affect the desirability of certain actions, such as lower fertility rates, or even bad things. For instance, consumption of alcohol. Right? You have to think in terms of what is the interesting research question. Okay. Third mechanism, third channel there through which the media can affect individual behavior is time use. Right? Time spent, as she writes, time spent in front of TV or listening to the radio is not allocated to other activities. Okay. It is essentially time allocation. Okay, how you allocate your time. She's got a little, a bit of a theory there, folks. I think we are more interested in the, then she reviews the literature. She can see there herself there. I think the literature review is also nice in this paper, because I think this paper was an address during the 2015 European Economic Association conference. So the literature review is a little bit more, it's longer than usual. And then here is the this point is because I didn't highlight that because, but that's the story I told you, right? This point is illustrated by considering the effects of soap operas, the novellas in Brazil. Over the past half century, Brazilian novellas have enjoyed enormous success in terms of viewership, and the Brazilian soap operas are very popular in Italy as well, right? In terms of viewership, cutting across social classes and covering a broad range of themes from love and intrigue to social and political issues. Importantly, the goal of the main producer of these soap operas, the Rede Globo, or the Globo TV, has always been first and foremost commercial success. So the soap operas never had any edutainment purpose, right? But even without knowing, that's the point she's making, right? Even without knowing, the soap operas, they were diffusing social norms of people living in the two main metropolitan areas of Latin America, Rio and São Paulo. Okay, Rio is essentially the Cape Town of Brazil, or I think I should put it upside down. Cape Town is the Rio of South Africa, and São Paulo is the main commercial hub of Latin America, or although it's 20 times bigger than Johannesburg, but Johannesburg is the São Paulo of South Africa. So essentially there was no edutainment goal there, but if you are in a very remote area of the rainforest and you are watching what is happening in São Paulo, where people already have lower fertility rates, or in Rio, where people drink a lot of beer, and play beach volleyball, right? So that might well change social norms. Okay. And you see, La Ferrara, Chong, and Dureya, 2012, studied the effect of Rede Globo's novelas on fertility in Brazil. Okay. And I think there is something here also. That is also the example of this paper here in a recent paper, Kearney and Levine 2014, find that MTV show, there is in the US, there is an MTV show called 16 and Pregnant, right? It's essentially about teenage pregnancy. Contributed to a significant reduction in teen pregnancy rates in the US during the months after its introduction, right? So essentially, that's what she's saying. And I think there is a paper here. Oh, there is also these papers dealing with, to the extent that the activities crowded out by television for this. So also there are papers dealing with communities in the United States where English is not the first language, right? And how exposure to English programs can improve or not the command of the English language, okay? And there was something here, some new evidence, TV ownership and socioeconomic outcomes. There was also something I think I missed, but maybe it's later on, about the Scandal soap opera in South Africa, about financial literacy. I don't watch TV, so maybe maybe you do. I don't. She next analyzed the relationship between exposure to TV, proxy by TV ownership, and a number of socioeconomic outcomes using recent data for a large number of African countries. And the data source uses the DHS. And as I said, I think if you are doing microeconometrics with Steve, I'm assuming it's Steve teaching that. I think he uses data from the DHS. Which is a series of nationally representative surveys of women and men aged 15 and 49. And she used the latest round available for 21 countries, right? And regression, she estimates the Y there is essentially a particular outcome that she's interested in, such as fertility rates, right? And then against TV ownership, where I denotes the individual and C the country. And then she's got fixed effects there. Y is a set of dependent variables, including knowledge and behavior related to HIV/AIDS. That's an important variable. Fertility and contraceptive use, gender norms and domestic violence, right? And TV is the key regressor of interest and is a dummy indicating whether the household where the individual lives owns a television or not. OLS in probit, unless otherwise stated, respondents are women, as this is the main sampling frame of the DHS. Equation 5 is it's the previous equation, is estimated with OLS, and standard errors are corrected for heteroscedasticity. That's a long Greek word. At the cluster level, which in rural areas typically coincides with a village. Results from dichotomous dependent variables are very similar and when using probit, but essentially she's using OLS. What else I found interesting there, folks? Signal strength and socioeconomic outcomes. Second analysis, Nigerian data TV signal. See also, I'm going to show you the tables in a few moments. Now she uses a second data set covering only Nigeria and TV signal in Nigeria, right? While the decision to buy a TV is likely correlated with household unobserved characteristics, one of the determinants of this decision is the availability of a strong enough TV signal to allow for good reception. So if you live in a remote area where there is no signal, there is very little point, maybe even if there is a guy trying to sell you a TV or a mobile phone or a radio, if there is no signal, why you are going to buy that, right? The latter in turn depends on the location of TV antennas as well as on the topography of the territory. She follows Oken 29, 2009, she used the irregular terrain model proposed by Huford to calculate the signal loss between the location of the transmitters of the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, the biggest TV network in the country, and the location of the respondents of the 2008 and DHS. Regression, identification, LPM, and probit. She exploits this variation to estimate the following model. Again, why there is a particular outcome that she's interested in. And then instead of TV ownership, now she uses TV signal, right? Where I knows the individual, so she's got the HS data, so she uses, she has individual data. The variables Y and X are the same outcomes and controls introduced in equation number 5, such as fertility, right? Decision, domestic violence. And then she uses also fixed effects. TV signal is a continuous variable measuring signal strength and constructed as described above. It varies across LGAs, not individuals, right? It varies across location. To account for possible confounding effects of geography, which may correlate with signal strength, she controls for some geographic variables. So she's got a number of control variables in there, including altitude, latitude, and longitude. Estimations use an LPM. That's on the method. Very little textbook material also. It's an important when you guys write your papers, either it's a master's dissertation or a PhD paper. Do not, folks, please, 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 do not abuse notation on the method. Do not use overcomplicated methods, and do not put textbook material explaining what every single economist should know, right? You don't have to explain what an LPM is. You don't have to explain the mechanics of OLS, right? Please do not make that mistake, because then you are essentially saying who you are. Okay. Then there is a lot of a little bit of more context coming from other social sciences, social learning theory, self-efficacy. I think somewhere here that is, oh, here it is, right? There is something about scandal there, right? The scandal is there. The recent project, Berg and Zia teamed up with, sorry, it's 2013, huh? Teamed up with the National Debt Mediation Association in South Africa to design content that could be incorporated into the main plot of the popular soap opera Scandal. At the time of the experiment, Scandal had been running for 8 years with 4 weekly episodes. You don't need me to tell you that, right? But for a period of 2 months, the authors introduced a subplot featuring a woman who was overborrowing through hire purchase contracts, then gambling in an attempt to recover money and fading into a debt trap. So essentially, this is a pyramid scheme. Eventually, the character sought help from NDMA and learned how to manage her finance in a responsible way. The goal was to use this role model, so that's the role model story, to convey information on the consequences of financially irresponsible behavior. And then she goes on and on and on, right? So, but Scandal is there. But that's not, that you can do, you don't need me to review the literature for you. I want to show you the data, the results, the more interesting things. Conclusions, and then we go to the tables. Context, this paper has argued that mass media has the power to convey not only political information, instructions on how to loot, but also values and modes of behavior that generate profound change in development outcomes. And these outcomes include family preferences and wealth and health, education and occupational choice, gender norms, and social capital. While many examples of this impact come from commercial television or radio programs that do not have explicit educational purpose, researchers and policymakers are increasingly resorting to combining education and entertainment into so-called edutainment productions, right? Or the role of edutainment. Okay, let's go to the... Okay, that's TV ownership, folks. TV ownership on my left. TV ownership has been increasing. What is this? Oh, those are countries. South Africa is not there, right? Since the 1990s, quite steeply, actually. And on the right is women with secondary education. So she's trying to uncover a sort of spurious correlation there, but she's trying to make the point also that there is maybe those two variables are moving together, okay? That is Nigerian. We are going to see that later on about TV signals, right? Remember that the second part of the paper is about using Nigerian data about TV signal. Okay, there we go. TV ownership and knowledge about HIV. I think it's an important thing, right? Especially not only because HIV was and is a serious problem in sub-Saharan Africa. We have all sorts of different ways of dealing with that, depending on the society and depending on the president in power. So, but dependent variable here is on the top here, folks. TV ownership, heard about AIDS, correlates positively with TV ownership. No drugs to avoid transmission during pregnancy, correlates positively with TV ownership. Know a place to test, correlates positively with TV ownership. Ever test for AIDS, correlates positively with TV ownership. So TV ownership, fertility and contraception. Again, woman wants another child, it's essentially 0 with TV ownership. Man wants more children than woman, correlates negatively with TV ownership. Number of births or fertility correlates negatively with TV ownership. Condom used less time correlates positively with TV ownership. So it's essentially how information can be diffused, right? And currently used contraceptive also correlates positively with TV ownership. One important thing here, folks, is that in this paper, she actually doesn't know what people are watching, right? Not in this paper. So essentially she is, TV ownership is a proxy, right, for assuming that people are watching programs which have a sort of message, of a sort of educational message in terms of fertility and contraception. Okay. What else? So that's a possible criticism. If you decide to review this paper, or if you decide to write your dissertation on something similar, that would be a prospective criticism and a way to actually improve what she has done back in 2015. Okay. TV ownership, gender norms and domestic violence. Again, woman decides on own money is essentially 0. Son preference is essentially 0. Emotional violence is 0. Sexual violence correlates negatively with TV ownership. So assuming that the TV programs are broadcasting a message about against sexual violence. Okay, physical violence is 0. Let me move a little bit. Beating justified if goes without telling, it correlates negatively. Argue correlates negatively. Neglects kids correlate negatively. Refuses sex correlates negatively. Burns food. So some people get beating because they burn food. It correlates negatively as well. Okay. So those questions, remember, those questions are coming from the DHS. Okay, from a survey. Okay. What else she puts there that I've raised my... And for some reason, I didn't highlight this table. I think it's, let me see. Okay, but I think that is the, I think that is the Nigerian, so the Nigerian data set, right? The signal power, yeah. I heard about AIDS, is negative. Positive, positive, positive. It's more or less the same story, although this one is negative. Infertility is essentially negative as well. That's the appendix, and that's the appendix. And as I said once, everything that you don't need in the paper, you put in the appendix. Okay, let me stop sharing to see if there are questions or comments about this paper, or is reasonably clear. Questions, comments, suggestions, criticisms, grievances? Okay, so there is a question here from Anne-Marie. On the comment about placing textbook material for multidisciplinary journals, reviewer comments wanted in-depth textbook materials on fixed effects and unit roots. Also, summary table of the regression output table. How do you respond to such comments? Well, Anne-Marie, I'm showing you papers in the top journals of our profession, and there isn't a single paper, right, which places textbook material in there. But if, as you say, right, if you submit this to a multidisciplinary journal, also bear in mind the quality of the journals, right? Because what happens is, right, if you are a PhD student, right, if I have a PhD student, at some point you are going to submit your PhD, right? And the supervisor, I will have to find you external examiners, right? And I'll make sure that your external examiners are concerned with the content and quality of your PhD, and not with the grammar of your English. Okay. However, in that case, if you have submitted your paper, right, to a multidisciplinary journal, and the referee is asking you for that, then do it. Okay. When you review your paper, you do everything that the referee is asking you to do, that you feel is doable, right? If you decide not to do something, you have to justify very clearly why is that you are not doing point B of what the referee is asking you to do. You have to rebut the referee. Okay, so if the referee is telling you to do something that you think is doable, you don't necessarily agree, but it's doable, just do it because you want to get the paper published. But bear in mind the quality of the journals, the quality of the referee reports, and the quality of the papers that you are seeing in lecture, right? You have to, as a PhD student, you have to be able to discern between a good journal and a not necessarily very good journal. Okay, that's an old conversation, right? That we have in essay. So, yeah. There was a previous question: would citizens being more conservative have an effect on growth? I don't know. It depends on how you. It depends on how you define citizen being more conservative in terms of what? In terms of, for instance, there is a literature. I think we're talking about 15, 20 years ago that Barrow was involved, which was about the role of religion, right, on particular outcomes. And if I remember well, he found nothing. But then he used a different variable, which was religiosity or church attendance, right? Church attendance, and then he found something. Okay, so it depends how you define how a citizen is conservative, right? New York is a very progressive city, right? And it's the city, the capital of the world, right? Texas, not necessarily, and it's Texas. Okay. So you need to apply to Twitter to do a large download, otherwise you can download 6 tweets per day, 6,000 tweets per day. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and then if you are going to put a paper on that, then apply, right? And get as as much data as possible. And even so, because 6,000 tweets per day is not great, not in terms of that sort of data, right? And I'm sure Twitter will not say no if you have a letter from a supervisor saying that this is going to be used for this and that, right? For a PhD, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I have a book somewhere of a guy who did his PhD with Alesina, I think, on Google searches. He wrote an entire book. It's somewhere there or here. So yeah, I think you have to apply. And that's what makes a PhD interesting, right? Or a paper interesting. Oh yeah, you have it's not only going to the IMF website and downloading the data from there. More questions, more comments? Okay. Okay. Let me stop recording. So that is essentially the lecture. So let me stop recording here, and then we continue our conversation about whether to go to campus or not. Let me stop recording now.